Thank you very much for inviting me. If I may share my screen.
Please do. Please do.
So the purpose of this afternoon's session, for those who joined us last time, our first meeting last month was all about how do we put data into the tool, into Safran Risk Manager. So we were adding new risks, we were editing and making updates to our existing risks and our actions. I mentioned at the time, in my opinion, risk management is all about actions. And if we're not taking the actions and we're not fulfilling the actions which the team needs to accomplish, then risk management has no value. So the heart of Safran Risk Manager is not about risk, it's about risk action taking. And that was one of the things which I really wanted to instill into the Safran product, because when you're doing your QSRA and you're looking at your data from a quantitative perspective, one of the things which we fail to see is the good quality actions that are going to be taken. And one of the things that I'll explain in a little while is our idea that we can do some cost benefit analysis in our approach to understanding risk. And again, risk management only adds value when people are not using a product like Safran Risk Manager, they're not entering data and are not maintaining data. That doesn't add any value. All the value is added by people not using a tool but actually getting up and doing work. So another key element of the philosophy that I try to embed into the tool is, let's keep it simple. Let's make it so easy that the users can come in, they can update their progress, and they can turn it off and they can get out. And that's where true value from risk management lies. Obviously, from us as risk professionals, what we need to be able to do is to consolidate that information and present it to the decision makers so they can know that which are the right actions to be taking, and are the actions which we've already decided upon being followed through and completed. So with that in mind, the last period was about data in. This presentation is going to be all about the information out. So we put data into a tool, we transform it into information, we then use that information for decision-making purposes. I'm going to log in, and it's a really simple system. We log in. It's worth noting for those who are not familiar with Safran Risk Manager that it is a web-based application, so it can be hosted on the cloud. At the same time, we recognize that a lot of our customers have high levels of security, so we have the ability to have it on premise as well. But in the ideal world, you log in using a username, password, or we've got it integrated with Office 365 for the single sign-on or dual factor authentication. But we log in, and the first thing that I'm presented with as a risk manager is the list of my projects. So we can see straight away in a very unambiguous way that I've got 5 projects which I'm responsible for, one of which is not on track. So the first piece of information which I'm deriving is already that my project Finland has is behind its plan. So it's not necessarily following the key metrics that we set for it. So I just want to do a very quick recap for those who missed our previous meeting. If I was a subject matter expert in the project and I'd logged in, then I would see data in this format, which is the risks which I'm responsible for, and I've also got the ability to look at the actions which I've also been granted responsibility for. But for today's purposes, what I really want to concentrate on is the fact that as a risk manager, I can convert the information which our subject matter experts have put into the tool and turn that into, so turn that data and turn it into useful information. Okay, so I can already see that Finland is running behind. Now, how do I investigate and turn the insights into actionable data? So my first thing that I want to look at is my dashboard, and I can use the little view icon here to quickly move into an appropriate view of my data, whether it be the risk register or the dashboard or any of the reporting under contingency such. So I can move into dashboard first of all, and within my dashboard I can take a look at both qualitative and quantitative data associated with the project. And it's worth pointing out at this stage that the dashboard is a single point dashboard, but it can be used not only for this single project. So I'm currently looking at my Finland project, but if I wanted to do so, I could use this as a portfolio viewer as well, and I could look across multiple projects and import multiple projects into my dashboard and show my portfolio view in the same dashboard view, both qualitative and quantitative data. Okay, if I just refresh my page now, that would take me back to single Finland. So I'm going to look at Finland. So the first insights I want to see is how many risks do I have that are been entered into my risk register. So the chart gives us an indication of how many risks we have in their life cycle stage. As I said, a risk when it's first created is unapproved. It would then be approved by the risk manager or the project manager who's responsible for the project. So they move from my list of unapproved risks into my state of approved risks. And I can see here that I've got 16 approved risks. Now this is very important for the dashboard because it's only the approved risks which will be modeled when we're talking about the probability impact diagram or the Monte Carlo quantitative analysis. We don't want to be modeling risks which are either unapproved because they may be wrong, they may be duplicates, they could have some sort of error to them, and we don't want to be modeling the closed risks. So closed risks are no longer going to be having an impact upon our project. So we only model the approved risks. And you can see, although I don't have any opportunities in this particular project, the data is split between threats and opportunities. Of interest, the closed risks here, of which I've got one in this particular project, we present that information on the right hand side here as a closed risks donut. Let me just put in a couple more projects so I can show you what it looks like when it's populated. And what this is showing me is, why did we close our risks? Now, what I've found in the past is many of our products and many of the tools which we have tend to ignore the data associated with a closed risk. We close a risk, therefore we've forgotten about it. But the truth is, a great deal of information can be gained from understanding why we are closing our risks. And if we can categorize our risk closure process, then we can actually learn whether or not our risk management process is being effective. So you can see here, I've categorized these as being the risk did not occur, the risk closed because the original assumptions had changed, and finally the risk has occurred at a particular type of impact, in this case a full impact. So I can see here that I'm either successfully mitigating or sort of successfully preventing my risks and avoiding their occurrence 50%, or we're doing something else with regards to make the risks no longer valid for our project at another 33%, leaving me with only 16% of my risks actually occurring and therefore having a direct impact of some type on the project. So as a very quick overview, I can see that the risk management processes are actually having an effect and they're being beneficial to the project simply because we're closing risks without them impacting on the project. And at the end of the day, isn't that what we're all here to do? And it's to prevent risks from occurring on the project, providing they're threats. If there were opportunities, we'd obviously want to enhance and exploit the opportunities if they're coming along. But with regard to threats, we would try to prevent them from occurring in the first instance. And I would, if I was the risk manager on this particular project and I saw this chart, I would be quite pleased with the progress we were making with the achievement of our risk management. We then come down to the classic favorite, the probability impact diagram. Now, it's a love it or hate it relationship that we have with probability impact diagrams. Personally, I'm not a fan. I think they've got their time and their place, but they shouldn't be the ubiquitous tool which everybody flouts as being the pinnacle of risk management. However, one of the things I've tried to build into our probability impact diagram is the ability to drill down into the impact side of things. So generally, when we present data on the probability impact diagram, we take the multiple impacts associated with the project or associated with the risk and take the worst case scenario. So we might have cost, we might have time, we might have a reputation or a health and safety risk. And what we do is we generalize that into a single impact, and we say the worst impact there is the one which we're going to present in our probability impact diagram. The truth is, those different impacts have got different characteristics, and we're probably more interested in looking at the way that those different characteristics are impacting on our project than we are in the general aggregate of impact. And so what we've done is we've invented the idea of filtering on impact. So when I switch the filter on, I can now see these are my cost impacts associated with the project. These are my time impacts, and these are my qualitative impacts. And I can start to see a picture forming that I've got significantly more cost than I have qualitative. But we go one step further than that, and we can drill down even further to say, of my qualitative impacts, show me, for example, the number of health and safety impacts I have, or the number of reputation impacts I have. And I can now really hone in and start seeing these are the reputation risks associated with my project. Now, I don't know very many tools which enable us to see specific impacts on a probability impact diagram. Now, we're currently looking at this as a 5x5 matrix, which would be the one which is associated with my project Finland. However, if I'm looking at this across a portfolio in an enterprise view, I may decide that I've got a range of projects from a small project size through medium up to large project, and even enterprise level project size, which may or may not have a different scoring methodology. So you can't score a $1 million project using a $10 billion matrix. It just doesn't make any sense, because the largest risk on that matrix is going to be insignificant at an enterprise level. So one of the things which we've created is the ability to actually compare different matrices using on-the-fly calculations. So if I switch off my filter first, so I've got some real data in here, and then I switch to, let's say, for example, the 3x3 matrix. I've got a 3x3 one here. What I'm doing here is on the fly, I'm recalculating the appropriate position for each of the risks, both pre-treatment and post-treatment, against a different scoring method. And that way I can start to see, do my risks which are on the small projects have an impact on the larger project score at the portfolio level? And I can then compare everything like for like. Yeah, a small risk with a small likelihood and impact would be at the lower end, and the large ones would be at the higher end. So that's a really neat way of comparing your different size projects across your portfolio. Whilst I'm running my filter, one of the other things which you'll notice is we've got a table underneath which gives a specific set of details about the risks themselves. And I can filter this and sort it so I can see which are my largest risks in my pre-score or my post-score. I can see who's got responsibility for them by switching on the owner, and I can look across my ownership. And the other thing which we can do with this data is, rather than just seeing it as a output report, we can drill into either the individual items on the risk matrix or within the table, and I can actually see the full data. So if I select a risk at random, you'll see what happens is it opens a tab at the top of the dashboard. So I'm still in the dashboard, but I've now got a tab which enables me to see the full information with regards to the risk that I'm interested in, all of its identification, all of its assessment, and its analysis. And I'm still within my dashboard window. Okay, so we've looked at qualitative information, but now we're going to take that information and we're going to pass it through a Monte Carlo analysis. Okay, now the difference between Safran Risk Manager and Safran Risk, which is our dedicated quantitative cost and schedule risk analysis tool, is that the models in Safran Risk Manager are very simplified. They have a simple basis of, did the risk occur or not occur? So it's a binary yes or no. And then if it occurs, what is the impact that the risk has had? Now, there's no correlation and there's no interdependencies between individual risks within this model. The key value which can be derived from looking at a Monte Carlo in this way is not so much the numbers as an output, but the profile. And I want to explain what I mean by that. So if I look at my post-treatment histogram on this particular chart, you can see I've got a relatively normally distributed set of values. Now that would be an indication that I've got a nice number of risks on my risk register and that there's no outliers with regards to having high likelihoods, low likelihoods or very high impacts. However, in this particular set of examples, if we switch my pre-treatment on, you can clearly see, let me just turn off that S-curve, you can clearly see that I've got a different type of profile. I've got a high hump of data here on the left-hand side, centering in around about $8 million. However, I've also got a very long tail. And it's this tail which is the dead giveaway that within my data set, I've got a low likelihood, high impact risk somewhere. Now, these types of risks are the ones which invariably hide at the bottom of a probability impact diagram. And this is where my faith in probability impact diagrams is limited. The truth is, if I've got something which in a traditional risk register says is greater than $10 million, well, what's greater than $10 million to sit in this high impact? Well, $11 million is greater than $10 million, but so is $100 million. There's no way to differentiate between those two types of impact when we're looking at the standard probability impact diagram. Only when we run those numbers and we do the modeling can we actually be certain that there's something hidden within that data. Because if we were using this particular color scheme, which is indicating our appetite, we would say that the risks in green are okay. We can probably ignore them. Well, that's a complete sort of false belief, because it's actually the earthquake zone risk, which I've got highlighted here, which is the risk which is driving my long tail in my Monte Carlo. But for all intents and purposes, if we looked at it purely in the probabilistic way, or the probability impact diagram way, you would think that this is a okay risk. But really, you can see that the low likelihood, very high impact that this could have on my project could potentially be catastrophic. And therefore, we want to be investigating into that data set. That profile is just one of several profiles which I would be on the lookout for when I'm analysing my data probabilistically. The other profile, which I can't demonstrate on here at the moment, I haven't got the data, but it would be the bimodality. Namely, we have not just one hump, but two humps. And that second hump would be an indication that we have a concentration of cost impacts around the second primary point on our size of our costs. So the way that we've set up Safran Risk Manager to use both a qualitative and a quantitative data input, it does become very easy for the users to select just the simple slider bar that says it's $1 million or it's $5 million. They do it time and time again. Qualitative is $1 million for medium. Qualitative is 10 million or 5 million and $10 million for their high. And they just repeat medium, high, medium, high, medium, high. And that comes up, and I've seen it a few times, with that very distinct double hump, the bimodal hump within the data. And that can, again, be an indication of the level of maturity that you have within your risk register. If I saw that, and we was only a few weeks into our design of our project, then I would be quite happy that we've started a qualitative assessment of our data, but we haven't yet moved into a quantification of the impacts, for example. As we move through the life cycle of our projects, we should expect there to be more granularity associated with the assessment of the impacts, and as a consequence, that bimodality should tend to start to move back to a standard normally distributed, or we might start to see outliers such as we're seeing on the screen here with a low likelihood, high impact risk. Now I'm going to switch off the portfolio view at the moment and just simply move to the single project. Okay, so here I am back on my single project, and the reason I've done that is because I wish to show to you the S-curve with regards to the amount of contingency which we're holding. So within the module, we have the ability to record a contingency bucket or a budget, and against that budget, we can retire the costs. We can bring costs into the budget, or we can transfer them between other budgets. And that contingency is being represented here by the blue line. Now the blue line is being set at, say, approximately $1.5 million. Now what I can see from this data using an S-curve is the degree of confidence which that level of contingency is giving me against my completion of my project. Now this is slightly false because of that long tail that we have in our data. However, I can quite easily hover over the S-curve, and you can see here that my $1.5 million is giving me a degree of confidence at about 35%. So I'm 35% confident that I have enough money to cover the occurrence of risk within this project. Now, for me, 35% is a significantly short degree of confidence against the assessment. And what I would personally want to be seeing is an area in around about 70, 80, even 85 or 90% degrees of confidence against my exposure. Well, I can quickly see what that level of contingency would look like by simply moving my mouse up the S-curve and saying, okay, if I wanted to have 80% confidence, then I'd need approximately 3 million. This is currently assessed in the pre-treatment position. Now I can switch off my pre-treatment on the S-curve, and I can see what that looks like post-treatment, and that would be assuming that all of our risk treatment strategies have been effective, and not only have they been effective, but they've been approved for inclusion. So there's always some danger associated with a post-treatment assessment. However, if you've got that in mind, you can see here that by hovering my mouse over the contingency, I've now got a P80. I'm running at 80% confidence that I have sufficient contingency, and that was probably the reason why we've elected to have $1.5 million as our contingency holding for this particular project, because it is at that P80 position at the post-treatment assessment. So this, having a built-in Monte Carlo analysis without any need for modeling to take place, it works live from the risk register and simply takes the data of the likelihood and the impact and models it live within the tool. So I can make changes to the register and they're instantaneously reflected back in this Monte Carlo analysis. But as I said, take care that this is a simplified model, and if you wish to undertake a much more detailed quantitative cost or schedule risk analysis, then you'd want to use our sister tool, which is Safran Risk, which would give you the capability of building sophisticated models around cost, around time, and integrating them together to give you the joint cost and schedule risk analysis and all of the associated analytical outputs associated with it. Okay, so this really is the heart of Safran Risk Manager's quantitative capabilities, but we also have other analytical processes which we can undertake. So the first one, and it's one I mentioned at the beginning, is our cost benefit model. Now, through the collection of data associated with the pre-treatment, the post-treatment, and most importantly, the actions which we intend to take and how much we're going to spend on the associated actions, we can then infer a ratio between pre-treatment and post-treatment with respect to the cost of the action. And that's what this chart here on the left is showing us. How much benefit does each individual risk derive from the action that we're going to take? So I can see here that this software development risk benefits the most from the actions which have been identified. But there is a caveat to this chart, and that it is a ratio and not an absolute figure. So it may well be that the software development benefits to the tune of $1,000, whereas the material cost increase benefits to the tune of $1 million. But because it's a ratio and not an absolute, we would see that the benefits are associated with the ratio relative to the size of the particular individual risk. So just bear that in mind. Just because it's big, it doesn't mean it's a massive benefit that's derived. It's a ratio, not an absolute. But we can take the same information, the pre-treatment, the post-treatment, and the amount of money we're going to spend on actions, and we can aggregate that across the project. So the chart on the right-hand side is showing us the aggregated exposure before treatment, the cost associated with the treatment, the exposure after the treatment, and the overall benefit derived from that investment. So in this particular instance, I can see that we're spending about $30,000 on our cost action, and we're deriving $14 million worth of benefit from it. Now, in my mind, that's a significant return on investment for those actions, and I'd certainly be very pleased to meet the person who has created such wonderful actions to benefit the project. Again, as a seasoned professional, alarm bells might well also be ringing, because if we're saying we're going to derive $14 million worth of benefit from only spending $30,000, well then, have we successfully identified and articulated very accurately what actions we want to be taking to achieve that much benefit? And again, these tools should be helping us as risk professionals to ask the right questions of the people who are entering the data. It's not just about taking the data at face value, but we should be challenging the degree of confidence that people have when they're creating their data. So the next chart is about categorizations. So during the data entry point, what we would do, we would categorize risks by their functions, by their risk breakdown structure, or by their individual ownership. And what these two charts here enable us to see is how many risks we have by each category. So in this case, I can see that I have a large number of risks for engineering, smaller number for procurement, and then project management. And I can see financially how impactful these are across the project. And I can see here, for example, that the engineering project, and this one would be associated with my earthquake risk, which I mentioned earlier, has got a large, significant pre-treatment financial impact. And you can use this information to, again, formulate the right questions to be asking of your team. Now, in my experience, a number of times when I've done an assessment of projects, what I've seen is very few material risks, like procurement risks within the register. However, when you looked at the financial impacts of those few number of risks, what you'll see is they have a significant bearing on the project. So that disconnect between the number of risks and the financial impact that those risks are having should be another alarm for us to ask the right question. And I would quite often phone up my material management, my procurement management, and say, do we have enough understanding of the material risks on our project? Have we identified enough risks? Have we articulated the correct actions to be taking to ensure that we're going to be covered for this large exposure from a financial perspective? And invariably what they would say is, well, we've got 10 suppliers of material, but all I've done is put a single risk in my risk register that says material suppliers. And the ideal scenario for that would be, let's have one risk per supplier and ensure that our actions are specifically tailored to ensuring that those suppliers are going to be meeting our requirements. So that could be a very simple way of utilizing this report. As I said, we also have a risk breakdown structure. Now, risk breakdown structures in Safran Risk Manager are universal, and that means we can look across portfolios of projects with the same risk breakdown structure and start determining the patterns which are across our organisation. So it may well be that we're seeing significant amounts of management risk being recorded. And again, in my experience, what you see is the risk manager and the project manager, because they are the people who are responsible for risks and risk registers, tend to put in a lot of their own risks, and therefore they have a natural bias towards management risks in the risk register. Part of the democratization of risk management, use of Safran Risk Manager, is to ensure that everybody has a simple means of entering their data. And so therefore we should start seeing a more even balance of the number of risks which are being entered into Safran Risk Manager. But again, that's experience, and it's also the ways in which your organization has decided to treat and manage risk. And I'm still working with organizations today who have got concentration of the risk teams maintaining and entering the data into the tool. But ideally, what I would like to see is everybody within the project has access to a browser, can log in and record and track their risks and their actions as they're going along. The last chart here is that ratio between the cost, the time, and the qualitative types of risk impacts. And again, in my experience, everyone focuses on the dollar value. Okay, how much is it going to cost us? A little bit less than that is what's the time impact. But very few of our risks, certainly where I used to work, would be associated with the less quantifiable values associated with maybe customer satisfaction or reputation, or maybe other values which you can't necessarily put a dollar or a day rate to. And so the ratios that you see here, cost to time to qualitative, are quite representative of real world values that I've seen across other risks and on other projects. Now, you may recall that from the probability impact diagram, we could drill down into each of those subsections, and that's what the chart here on the right is giving me an indication of. It's saying for my subcategorizations of cost, which I currently have as labour, material and expenses, which is the largest amount of financial impact that we have. And I can see here that labour is running at about 62%, materials at approximately 30%, and therefore my expenses are 8%. Now, the question I would have as a risk professional is this the correct ratio of impacts given where we are in the life cycle of the project? Because if we're at the early stages of the life cycle, then I would anticipate there to be lots of material risk associated with the delivery. Yeah, are we going to get the supplies we need? Are we going to utilize it appropriately? Are we going to consume it? As we move through that life cycle, I would anticipate that these ratios of subcategorizations to change such that the materials are depleted, and maybe we have a little bit more of an even balance between materials and labour, and the expenses and risks associated with additional costs may well start to come into play. But again, it's all about learning from experience, knowing how your risks move through their natural progression or their life cycles, and how the balance of risks change across those life cycles. The final thing I want to say is, whilst we've been moving through this dashboard, you may have noticed that there's a remarks comment associated with each of the major sections: the qualitative, the quantitative, and the categorizations. And what it's doing is possible for us as the risk professionals to record commentary about what we're interpreting from the data. Now, this becomes very valuable in a couple of ways. The first is we have a history of how we've interpreted the data as we've moved through the life cycle of the project. And the second is that anybody picking up any of our reports will be able to see our professional interpretation of the data, and they wouldn't have to necessarily just guess what it means. And that's particularly important in my experience from the Monte Carlo analysis. So I've actually been in reviews with management, and I've presented to them a Monte Carlo chart, or the histogram I should say, and they've essentially looked at it, not realized what it was telling them, and not wanting to look stupid in front of the people who are in the review, quickly move past it. Whereas there's a great deal of information to be had there. And if only I'd learnt sooner to put my own commentary against it, and that says we're running at a P30 on our contingency and it's insufficient, then the decision makers can take that information and say, right, why are we holding such low levels of confidence against our exposure? It starts to add life and really bring the information to the decision makers' perspective so they can make better decisions by having commentary. And I think that's quite a valuable addition to any of our reporting capability. Okay, I'm conscious of the time. The dashboard is primarily the heart of Safran Risk Manager's interpretation, but of course we'd be remiss if we hadn't thought about how do we generate reports. And Safran Risk Manager has a suite of reports which enables you to take the information and output it in a variety of types, whether it be visual or in table form, and enables you to communicate the information in a way which is consumable by the audience. And we've got different types of reports for the different audience types that we have. So for example, we can run a single report against an individual risk. So I simply select my review risk and I'll just pull up one. And this is essentially a risk on a page. So this is one risk with its necessary information, its likelihoods, its impacts, its actions, all on one page. I can do it for a single risk. I can also do it for a block of risks associated with a particular type. So for example, show me all the individual approved risks. Another type of report that we have is the summary report. The summary report is the one which is going to contain those commentaries which we've just been talking about. So it's essentially looks at the key elements from that dashboard, from a probability impact diagram, and it enables you to record your reports and comments against it. And we also have a quick look at how beneficial the actions are against the top risks that we have. So that's a very simplified decision-making report against the overall project. And then one for us risk managers, how well are we doing with regards to the closing of risks and the closing of actions? And this risk report, what we call the health report, gives us a little bit of a trend analysis as to where we were last period that we snapshotted the data compared to this period, so we can see, are we starting our risks, or are our risks being triggered on time? Are we starting our treatment strategies on time? Are we closing our actions when we said we're going to close them? And that brings me to another point, which is, as a risk manager, I've got the ability to send notifications, and these email notifications are associated with this particular report. And what I can do is I can select my project, I can select the type of overdue information that I want, and it will go automatically to the owner of the risk or the action, so that I don't have to troll through the data manually. It's all done automatically for you. Okay, so there are several other tabular types of reports, including the risk register report, which allows you to filter and set specific requests on the data, and you simply hit the report data project, and the data is then created in a table format. And once it's created, what you can do is you can export it to PDF, you can export it to Excel, you can send it to the printer. And I'll just wait for this to run through. Okay, and if I export to PDF, you'll see we now have a PDF view of the data in the risk register associated with the categories or the ownership that I've selected in my assessment there. So it's quite a neat way of looking at the data. The same goes for the actions, the same goes for some of the others as well. And then the final one which I want to show you, because I'm conscious of the time, is my lessons learned report. Now, when we go through the life cycle of a risk, and I've mentioned this with regards to the closed risk, but we should, when we're closing out a risk, undertake a process of assessing why we've closed it, how impactful it's been on our project, and what lessons we could have learnt from that experience. So we can bring that information together on a closed project report, And from here, we can actually see the name of the risk which has been closed, the reasons we've closed it, how much it's cost us, and any lessons that we've learned from that. So we can use that lessons learned information to do better next time when we're considering and assessing our risks. Gustavo, that's 45 minutes of talking. I don't know if we've got any questions. I'd like to throw it open to questions at this point. If there's anything more that anybody wants me to show you, then I'm more than happy to do so.
I have a couple, but I will let the audience do it first. And thank you so much. Thank you so much, because it's the gift that keeps on giving. You were showing more and more things, and I say, oh my, it's endless. All these things that you have here. So do you guys have any question for the audience? And thanks everyone who I know that we're just in time. So thank you for that, Mark. But yeah, I have one that and I know this is something that you can do, but maybe this is something that somebody is maybe you can explain in a couple of minutes how you connect Safran Risk with Safran Risk Manager. So
yeah,
not even showing. Maybe you have already
done,
but maybe just how it works, just for people to know that they can connect both.
Absolutely. Okay, so I'll actually show you physically how to do it, but whilst my Safran Risk is loading, because it'll take a couple of seconds, just let me explain the architecture which we've used to enable Safran Risk Manager and Safran Risk to talk to each other. So Safran Risk Manager has its own SQL database, which we populate and we communicate to using the API, the Application Process Interface, API. And what the API enables us to do is to tap into it with third-party tools, of which Safran Risk would be a similar tool, or, for example, Power BI. So you can use the architecture of Safran Risk Manager to interrogate the Safran Risk Manager database and build your own analysis and your own reporting, whether it be in a tool like Safran Risk or another tool. Not forgetting that Safran Risk has its own database, so don't be confused by the fact that there's a Safran Risk database and a Safran Risk Manager database. But if I can drag this over, move. There we go. All right. So yeah, here we go. Here we go. So in Safran Risk, what we need to do is we need to tell Safran Risk where to look for the API to get the data from Safran Risk Manager. And the way we do that is we select options, and in here we have SRM connection, and this is where we give it the URL for the API and the tenant name. Once we've got that set, and you only need to do it once because it remembers where it is, you'll see for the project which I have open, I have the ability to import risks from Safran Risk Manager. And so I select that. And of course it's put it over on my other window. Let me just disconnect. What I would do is I would log in to the Safran Risk Manager database. So I'm going to just log in using my own credentials here. And then when I connect to the Safran Risk Manager database, what I've got is full access to all the projects which I've recorded in that database. I can select one or more of those projects. So I've got a couple of projects here. I hit next. We're then looking at the information for individual risks within that data set. So you can see I've got my two projects. I've got Blue Sky Phase 1 and the program group. I can now select the individual risks or all of the risks. And when I press import, what that does is, and I'll not do it now, but it will import the data into the project risk list.
Okay, great.
And you can see which ones are the ones which have been imported from Safran Risk Manager, because they're the ones which are purple. So so this is now and you can see it says under the notes, imported from BS1 from Safran Risk Manager. So you've got here down at the bottom right hand side an indication that it's been brought across from Safran Risk Manager. So that's it. The data's in. We can now map it. We can then run the analysis and make that work.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Maybe it's something that people were asking themselves. And then the second one was about these reports that you were showing, all these reports. So they come with Safran Risk Manager, or you have to configure them when you set up the software?
So everything that I've demonstrated today is what we call out of the box. It's all available and ready to you on the first day that you have it. So there's no configuration. You don't need to build models. You don't need to generate reports. They're all fully configured and ready to go. All that you need to do is enter some risk data into the risk register, and all of this information can then come straight out of it.